All right, Alec, how's it going, man? Back to a podcast here.
All is well. We survived the mid Atlantic pollen mystery dust storm last night.
Yeah, any exposure where you live?
I don't know. I mean, whatever the mystery substance was that was clearly rained down by UFOs might take a little while to, materialize in our lives.
Dude, there's a lot. I wouldn't be so casual about the old UFO news. They keep coming every few days. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to make of
Um, who says I'm casual about it?
it.
I just don't want to attract attention from anyone who might in the future run the planet, who
Yeah,
was saying that I was taking a contrarian view too early.
yeah.
So I'm going with glib.
Did you see? This was pretty recent, but I had the time to watch on 2x speed because I can't stand anything less than that. Eric Weinstein was on Joe Rogan going on like for
So
four
I just
hours
saw
talking.
some coverage of it.
Yeah, what did the coverage say?
Uh, the coverage, well, this is the opinion of random people on Twitter,
Sure.
that was that it veered, you know, into conspiracy and unfounded projections pretty quickly. But there's a whole cohort of people that really dislike him and his brother. Um, so I don't know what you actually listened to it. What did he say?
I mean, I like to when I'm talking about charts in the economy, and you can let your thoughts and your words pretty quickly veer off into wild places when you're talking about like macro level economic stuff. So, like, I'm a fan of sidebar tangents just as much as anyone, but that guy is just the king of them. Like, I mean, he'll go
Mm.
on. It's hard to follow exactly what he talks about at any one point in time, but theoretically, he was talking about the emergence of these UFOs sort of in collective modern consciousness, and whether it's real, whether it's a psyop, whether it's cover up for U.S. state technologies that really do exist, or whether there is, really something there that's not man-made that also maybe the U.S. government is still covering up because they have a handle on it and they don't really want it to get out. Um, but of course, it's a 4-hour podcast. People are going to have to go in and make their own judgment there. But I mean, it's just wild to me that like all of this stuff is coming out in the last few weeks, months. I don't know. That's not new. I mean, if I enjoy a good UFO story here and there, like I really do. But
Who doesn't?
yeah, but I don't quite know what to make of it because I didn't read any of the reviews, but um, he was making it seem like him and even Sam Harris at some point were brought into the fold or potentially brought into the fold as being people that would be part of some disclosure event. Like if this was going to be real, they were going to disclose it. That's what he was alluding to as much. But then he would
And
stop and he would go on some tangent about 1950s physics and then nukes and all the rest. And you couldn't get anywhere. And then he said he was drinking too much. I saw a tweet afterwards, so blamed it on the alcohol. But
I have an easier time believing in UFOs than I do that the US government would use Weinstein as part of a planned disclosure.
yeah, well, on top of that, like, how likely do you think it is that they could really cover this stuff up? That's the other interesting thing.
I remember a while back, this was years ago, you sent me, maybe it was, I don't know how long ago, not that long ago,
Yeah,
you sent me that Australian journalist.
cold
His
tart. Yeah,
Is that him? Yeah, I thought he was actually very interesting,
yeah,
but for no other reason than his subject matter is very exotic, and he presents it in a very documented and sober way.
yeah.
And so, what I would have expected based on the claims he makes in his stories is that he would be more eccentric, but he comes off as just kind of like a well-researched reporter. And so I found his all of his stuff very compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, and he as well has talked a lot about the dangers to privacy. Um, use a VPN online and these types of things. It's just base level. But yeah, more and more of these stories keep coming out. It's weird. I don't quite get it. I don't know what to make of it.
If you wanted to intimidate your enemies, it would be clever to project the idea that you have access to potential alien technology that they don't.
Yeah. And the center of geopolitics now is not the Soviet Union, it's China. The center of sort of military geopolitics now, it's more China versus U.S., not Soviet Union. Although Putin is trying to project that power the best that he can. Um, but yeah, no, it's not. It's not. It's an interesting rabbit hole. I think it's weird, but for me, I'm much more interested in like real world threat to human lives. I don't know, every
Mm.
day, because there was a lot of Jews that came from Ukraine and got out of Ukraine during the Soviet Union in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
Jackson-Vanik agreement, which or amendment. It was a huge boon actually for Eastern Europeans to get out, and Jews in particular, because the Soviet Union wanted to kind of look like they were being helpful, even though their society was crumbling and everything. And it was very good that there was a lot of people that could get out of Eastern Europe and come to the U.S. And so he's from that part of the world, and I don't know. It's just this constant battle that we have to fight, and unfortunately, a lot of this intellectual dark web type of people, Texas libertarians, all the rest. I understand if you're talking about going to Moscow, invading, trying to take down the Kremlin, Napoleon style. Like that's not what I am for at all. And no one, I think, is saying that. But if you're talking about defending a country that has been invaded, and it's been exactly 1 year ago since that has occurred, um, it's just it's so real for us here in Eastern Europe. I mean, this is exactly what my grandparents fled from. It's Russian tyranny, Stalinist deportations to Soviet labor camps, the Gulag, all the rest. And yeah, they didn't have as atrocious type of a policy as the Nazis, um, but Stalin killed more people than Hitler, and Stalinist ideology, communist, dictatorial, autocratic ideology is nothing to be revered. And Putin is trying to change that. He's trying to turn that all around, and people fall for it. I
Mm-hmm.
saw. So anyway, that's one of the other things that I don't think, unfortunately, Rogan gets enough. He doesn't at least amplify that voice enough, and he certainly hears the other side a lot. And even Weinstein is talking about this. Someone from that part of the world. Um, And look, I mean, I sympathize with the entire sort of feeling that Jewish people could have being like their large diaspora, like being all around the world. That's exactly how Eastern Europeans are. They had to flee their homes during World War II, and actually Russians themselves are the largest diaspora of Eastern Europeans. Chinese and Indians, I think, are the largest diasporas worldwide. But after that, you have Russians. There's 30 million Russians around the world. Um, but in any event, like Eastern Europeans, Latvians, Lithuanians, Poles, Slovaks, Czechs, anybody who could get out of Eastern Europe at the time, they tried. And there were a lot of Jews that did get out in the 70s and the 80s, and I think that's great. I don't know if exactly his family was during that time or if it was before. I guess he was probably earlier. I think he was telling stories about how he was in Harvard in the 80s and stuff. But in any event, like to just blame the Ukrainians, to blame Zelensky, to talk about how it's like somehow Ukraine invaded Russia with all this mess. I understand that the nuclear threat is a big idea here in this debate, but that's not what anybody on our side is talking about. We're not talking about invading Russia. And it's just like we're not gonna stand for another Soviet Union being formed here in Eastern Europe. So I don't think that he understands that. And I think it's sad because he should, because he comes from a diaspora. He comes from someone who suffered from persecution, for centuries. Like that from his people. It's the same thing that Eastern Europeans have suffered from as well. Like I actually understand that. So I don't get the lack of willingness to help Ukraine. And then you layer on top the Putin he did this speech the same day that Biden gave a speech in Poland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Putin gives this absolute bullshit malarkey, to use a Biden word, of a family values type of speech. You know that he's totally latching on his spin doctors, his propagandists. They're totally latching on to all of the anti woke stuff that is real in the West that I agree with. I'm sure you agree with. Many people agree with. All right, we've gone too far with many of the, let's say, the woke policies. Okay, that probably it's just a loud majority on Twitter, but no one else really, if you're talking about the vast middle ground majority of people in the US or anywhere, agrees with. But he's trying to act like the West is just taking off into this crazy direction. And you got people like Patrick Bet David, I saw a tweet from him. It's like, love him or hate him, look at Vladimir Putin talking about the nuclear family and how important that is. Like, this guy, Putin, has children with 3 different women. He's absolutely like, I mean, he's a murderous, tyrannical dictator. He's invaded a country a year ago that's just have all of us on edge here in Europe. Like, to even entertain the idea that this guy is some sort of a normal, not megalomaniacal crazy man. It makes our blood boil here in Eastern Europe, and it's just, I don't know. We have to keep steering the conversation back to Ukraine is a sovereign nation that has been invaded illegally, and it's been going on for a year now. And it's getting tougher and tougher. It's getting tougher and tougher to defend that. And who knows? Maybe all this bullshit about UFOs is part of that, trying to steer away from that argument. I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm. So one of the popular narratives has been, well, if NATO hadn't expanded so much and wasn't upon Russian borders, they wouldn't have felt compelled to retaliate. And I know you feel strongly about that narrative. Where does that stand a year later?
Oh, I've talked about it. I mean, ad nauseum. I don't know. I don't want to talk too much. I keep talking about Eastern Europe here. I know we'll do our privacy portion of this show as well, but I want
Oh,
to
we'll
hear
do that
your
later.
I want to hear
We'll
your
do that
thoughts.
later.
Yeah, yeah. I want to hear your thoughts on the NATO stuff too, because look, very quickly, it's all bullshit. The not 1 inch, the Baker story, all that. This is a simple thing that has been vastly blown out of proportion, and no one understands the history. Gorbachev himself, when he was talking with Bush and Baker and these guys in 1990, all right, this was about the reunification of Germany in 1988, 89. Okay. This not 1 inch saying happened February of 1990. All right. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The only thing on the table at this time, the only thing on the map, literally the geopolitical map, was the reunification of East Germany with West Germany. If you looked at a map further east, you would see the Soviet Union and you would see Warsaw Pact countries. Warsaw Pact countries, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, all the rest. That, not by their own volition, not by their own will, definitely Soviet Union bullshit post World War II annexed, strong arm type of a agreement. It's not like NATO, which was a coalition of the willing, literally, to use that phrase. Anything to the east of East Germany, including East Germany, post World War II, was a bullshit communist, uh, you know, concept creation, including the Baltics, where my family's from. So those discussions after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Helmut Kohl with George Bush, Baker, and of course Gorbachev representing the Soviet Union, they had everything and only to do with East Germany. That was Helmut Kohl's and the Germans' only priority. They just wanted Germany to be reunified because they were destroyed, they were dismembered, they were torn apart after World War II, and I think rightly so. And frankly, I think the real interesting discussion is what to do with Russia after they lose, and they will lose, right? But if you don't like what happened to Germany, maybe talk about what you want to do with Russia. But that's kind of a tangential what I'm saying. Point is, Germany was completely dismembered. All right, France, the UK, the US took the west of Germany, and Russia took the east. Soviet Union took the east, completely dismembered, and Berlin itself in the east was cut in two as well. So the discussion about all of that, and this, like, in the minutes, this not 1 inch, they agreed or they didn't agree. First of all, Gorbachev himself said in plain English in 2014, NATO was never on the table. But you only have to use a map and understand history to see that NATO couldn't have been on the table. This was February of 1990 when that statement was made. All those things were happening. The Soviet Union was still on until December of 1991. Very, very few people knew that the Soviet Union was going to collapse when it did and how it did. And certainly, thank God it did peacefully. But, the Baltics, we were making moves in 89 as well. We had the singing revolution and all of these things. But as far as like this whole creation, this fairy tale story that NATO double crossed Gorbachev or whatever, it wasn't even on the table. And anyway, why would we have to promise that? All right. But it wasn't on the table. NATO didn't, there, like the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union's bullshit counter to NATO, that was what existed on the map east of East Germany and including East Germany. The only discussion was reunifying Germany and what to do about, weapons, missiles, and everything in West Germany of the U.S. Had nothing to do with anything that was east of that, east of East Germany, because the Soviet Union was on the war, so it couldn't even have been in the discussion. It's impossible. The maps that the children were looking in school books didn't exist to say anything else. There's no way there was a discussion about NATO expansion in 1990. It just doesn't. It's an absolute made up, piece of bullshit imagination. And unfortunately, this sort of, alt-right or even like intellectual dark web type people, they just drone on about this without having any concept of history or understanding about how the Soviet Union broke up. And then further to that, the more important point is it's fair game once the Soviet Union breaks up. Once the Soviet Union breaks up, every single person in Eastern Europe, and you see what they wanted to do, they clamored into NATO. They desired it. We desired it. The Baltics got in 2004, and they had every right to do so. They had every right to do so. So you cannot say that where we are where we are is because of the United States strong-arming some sort of a situation here. It had nothing to do with that. And in 1990, when any supposed promises were made, had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, very compelling. I actually grew up with this because I don't know if I told you, we lived in Vienna when the Berlin Wall fell, and my dad was working on those negotiations at the time because all the negotiations with the Soviets were in Vienna, and he was at the embassy and on the negotiation team.
You did not tell me that. I knew you were abroad, but I didn't know
Yeah,
you were.
yeah. So he was going back over to Moscow, and he would come back to Vienna with like pieces of Russian or not Russian, Soviet um, military artifacts, and people were selling their uniforms on the street. And
Yeah.
so he worked in the political section under Ambassador Maresca. He was the U.S. ambassador to Vienna at the time. And they were like, I forget what it was called. They were the delegation that would negotiate with the Soviets. He has great stories about it. Maybe I could get him to come on. And you and he would probably have a very interesting conversation.
It'll be great.
We were little kids back
Yep.
then, but I remember as it was I remember something big was going on. Like it was a really big deal.
Yeah. Same. And,
Yeah.
for us, obviously it meant more, to my father and to like people in Eastern Europe that like really had the chance for the first time ever in their lifetimes to be free again. But that's the same. I think it's the same thing now that Ukraine is dealing with. It's super important. Like we should support them the best we can. I'm not saying invade Russia for sure. I'm not even saying necessarily to go into Ukraine, although one has to ask how much destruction and death and just violation of basic human rights we need to endure.
You mean like having a NATO?
Yeah,
a
NATO presence. Yeah, I know
that would be a big deal.
That's obviously a different kettle of fish, and of course, Russia having the nuclear threat, unlike other adversaries of the U.S. in certain situations, changes the calculation there. But anything that we can do to Ukraine, I mean, and the Baltics here, we've been raising independently, like just millions and millions for Bayraktars and drones and different sorts of radar type stuff. It's really impressive, and for the small countries that we are. but like we're definitely not going to stop. I mean, we have refugees here. It's just a huge part of our world. And
Mm.
if again, if you're in the U.S. and you just want to have Biden focus on domestic policies, I think that's one thing that's totally legitimate and always is something that's going to have to be politics are going to have to balance politicians, and that's something you have to balance between domestic and foreign. But this war, the way that it was waged, it's just as unjust as any war. And by the way, I'm not in any way trying to forget, or I wasn't a fan of the Iraq or Afghanistan invasions from the baby Bush years either. I mean, those are the college pub discussions of our times, right? When
Mm.
we were in school. And yeah, that's a whole other story, right? I mean, people have friends if they went to Iraq or they didn't. I have friends on both sides of that, but I certainly am not going to defend that, just like I wouldn't defend Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Hmm. Yeah. The the sovereignty baseline, or the premise of the any kind of argument, has to involve, a sovereign nation being invaded. And the kind of like insistence up until the night before, by Russian diplomats and Russian politicians, that it was not happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I don't know why they would waste their credibility, what little credibility, if any, they have on like obtuse statements that are going to be proven false in a matter of hours.
Yep.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yep. And then yeah, it's like the UFO stuff, right? None of this stuff
It's
makes sense
exactly like
anymore.
that.
And all the woke, anti woke, I should say, alt right type folks saying it's not going to happen, writing crazy amounts of articles, just demonizing all of the people, which again I traditionally don't agree with. And it's wild. It's like bizarro world, right? That the Democrats are the ones that are ready to stand up militarily when this is something, a mantle that was typically taken by Republicans, in the past. And again, I'm speaking before neocon baby Bush years. I'm speaking before that. But
Hmm.
it's bizarro world that it's just these people that are in the same line of thinking. It's like they have to be suspicious about COVID. You're definitely suspicious about Ukraine, and you're definitely writing 1 year ago just diatribes about how this is all bullshit. The national security apparatus is wrong. This is all bullshit. It's never going to happen. And then none of them has apologized. I've never seen one journalist or quote journalist, someone from this side, say, "Oh yeah, I actually kind of got that wrong, didn't I?" They just double down, and it's like, okay, now it's just this is a combination of conspiracy from the mainstream media. Biden's son laptop was like, all of this is just massive conspiracy from the left. It's
Mm.
like, what are you talking about? Like, we have women and children literally getting raped. That's their MO. Russian soldiers' MO. Hundreds of thousands of people have been deported. Millions have been displaced. If you include deportations as the new annexed regions as well, that's millions. And all of this is a violation of the Geneva Conventions, if that meant anything anymore. United Nations is a joke. It's all just like this is literally World War II type stuff. And I think the next interesting question, which I don't know if you want to talk about now, but it's as I was alluding to earlier, like I do believe Russia will lose this. Like they can't have it, no matter what. They cannot have Ukraine. All right, they think that they can. They just can't. We're not going to let them reinstate the Soviet Union. No Ukrainian wants that. None of my friends in Ukraine want that. I've had friends that have parents that have died. Like it's so real. It's so raw.
Mm.
No one's ever going to bow down to Russia or to Putin. Like they want to be free. So the question is, once Russia loses this, what's going to happen? And is it going to be another frozen piece, or is Russia going to really be destroyed and have to be treated in sort of a different way? Are there going to be trials? Are there going to be human rights tribunals? All of these types of things. But
Hmm.
a more interesting um, thought experiment, I think, is: are you, dear lover of liberty in the West, like, how do you feel like we handled the German situation? And I'm not saying I know the answer to that. I'm not. It's rhetorical. I'm not saying I know the answer to that, but Germany
Oh,
was.
you mean like the Nuremberg trials
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the,
yeah.
oh yeah,
Those
yeah.
were very political in themselves. Like, I don't know if you ever read anything about that. It's really wacko
No.
how like Soviet generals came and they're like the Soviets came in their like general type outfits. The military lawyers, the other ones were in robes and stuff like Western style. The Brits, the French, the Americans. Um, no one could agree on anything. The policies were all weird. Like the protocols were all weird. Still, of course, I think most of the people can't were brought to justice. But like Germany itself was just completely dismembered,
Hmm.
and they needed to be. I mean, it was a Nazi crazy regime gone wrong. But I don't know. Was there a better way we could have handled that? I don't know. Um, they had just killed 6 million Jews. They had just destroyed all of Europe. I don't know. But like we're far from that right now with Russia. But as far as Ukraine goes, they're bringing as much devastation, just as much devastation, billions and billions of dollars, the rapes, the murders, torturing. It's awful. It's absolutely awful.
Yeah, I mean, with Germany, I don't know. So, other than like having, every a basic level of historical context on it, but what I think is look at the arc of the outcome, right? Germany becomes, a democratic free society, stalwart of the EU economy, strong member of NATO. I mean, we could debate that, right? Given
Yeah,
their reticence
yeah,
to contribute at times, but they have largely been on the right side of history since then. And the same could be true said of Japan, right? So both of those countries were, mortal enemies and very much like cruel regimes, which played out in horrific ways. And now they're, among the strongest Western free allies,
yeah,
right? So something played out correctly there. I don't know if that was, I don't know where we attribute that, right? But something worked.
yeah.
Now, why the breakup of the Soviet Union didn't materialize in the same direction, I don't know.
It did for the Baltics. The Baltics.
That's okay. True.
We
Yeah.
had a. The thing is, we had a historical continuation that we could go back to. We had free constitutions. They were very limited, but in the interwar years between World War One and World War Two, the Baltics were free and independent nations. Really, the first time ever for Latvia and Lithuania. Sorry, for Latvia and Estonia. Lithuania has an old. If power means a state, Lithuania was the biggest state in Europe from 1300 to 1800 for 500 years.
Really?
Yeah, and then they were
Huh.
dismembered from 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 1300 to 1500 mostly by themselves, and then from 1500 to 1800 in union with Poland. And Poland, this Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland and Lithuania were basically dismembered. Poland actually became the stronger counterparty there in that union later on, but Poland and Lithuania were completely dismembered by the Russian Empire, the Austrians, and the Germans in 1800. So there's no
Hmm.
state basically at that point for them. And again, another absurd thing from Putin's speech was like, you know, uh, there was too much interference from Poland and from I think it was Poland and Austria. He said in his speech or something. It's like it's just not even correct historically. Like and he said around the 1800s, around the year 1800, Poland was completely dismembered by Russia, by Germany, and by Austria. So anyway, long roundabout way of saying like the Lithuanian nation, they did have a state, they had a nation. If power means something, which apparently it does to a lot of people, it wasn't really that case for Latvia and Estonia, but still, all of these nations they've had a free people at some way, shape, or form. It's really just the eastern type of nations that were in the Soviet Union that did not continue on like that. Um, the Azeris, the Georgians, they're trying to be more free and less corrupt and have less
Hmm.
problems from the Soviet Union. And Ukraine as well, of course, was the big one. But Belarus, Russia, and I think you can say the same question marks for a lot of Central Asian nations that were part of Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. But Belarus and Russia, and Ukraine, they're the three traditional like Slavic core nations. They're just worried. They're worried to see Ukraine go. Timothy Snyder is a great historian on this. I would encourage, if you're really interested, to follow some of this stuff. But it's like he says something which I think is totally true. It's like the way Putin and Russian oligarchs project how their foreign policy will be against America wins the day for them, regardless of what happens domestically. It's like for domestically in the U.S., like no one even thinks about Russia. No one even cares about Russia. No one probably even knew where Kiev was on the map before the war started in America. We don't think about it. It's just just another country, right? Um, it's just not a part of domestic policy or even domestic. It's not on domestic. People just don't think about it in the United States. But in Russia, that's the idea. It's like us, we are powerful. It's us against America. It's us against the world. And as Timothy Snyder says, and I have said this as well. Like I think Putin loves it. I think they love it. They love being on the stage here. They certainly fucked up. They certainly have violated all sorts of human rights and problems and crimes they've committed. But as for right now, they're going to do all that they can to just keep this narrative up that like they are holding something sacred and they are being aggressed on from their sphere of influence by NATO and the U.S., which again we've already gone through that. So
Yeah, I mean, I was in LA a couple weeks ago at dinner with some friends, and we were talking about. So I had been at dinner with these exact same friends exactly 1 year ago when the invasion occurred, and so we were kind of talking about this. And then, as kind of like a thought experiment, we started asking other people in the wait staff at the restaurant if any of them had heard of the Wagner Group, and no one. That one guy was like, "Oh, that sounds so familiar," right? But no one knew who they were, and I was like, and so my buddy, he called it because I was like, oh, I'm sure people know what the Wagner Group is. He's like, I bet you no one here does, and we didn't find a single person who knew what the Wagner Group is. So you're exactly right, and that, I mean, I don't know, that really was surprising and maybe telling too.
yeah, yeah, no easy answer there. No easy answer, and it's unfortunate. A year ago, a lot of friends there.
Yeah.
We think about them all the time, donating, doing all we can. But you know, I've had some listeners reach out, which has really been great and heartening.
Mm.
Some even said they've changed their mind, which has been really great. Like it's hit home what we're saying, but it's just like no one's talking about nuking Moscow. We're just talking about defending Ukraine. That's all that we're talking about here, and not even
Do you
saying.
include reclaiming Crimea in defending Ukraine?
I'll leave that up to the Ukrainians, but
Yeah.
it's their decision. It's their decision. It certainly was a part of Ukraine before the invasion, and there was a referendum at the end of the Soviet Union, a peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the majority of every single region of Ukraine voted to secede from Russia, from the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
as well. So I'll leave that up to the Ukrainians.
Um, so that UN vote yesterday on ending hostilities, the the dissenting countries were Belarus, North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, Mali, and Nicaragua.
China abstain.
Yeah, they must have abstained. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think India abstained too.
yeah, yeah,
So that those are your playground buddies right there.
yeah, yeah. It's
And then
telling.
141 countries, voted to end.
Yeah, it's telling, and it's not. It's just not a story of wokeism of I don't know Western values gone wrong. It's just not at all that. And in any event, like if you want to talk about the people that are most centered on this family unit, like it's Eastern Europe. I don't know. I don't want to paint too broad of a brush here, but like all of Eastern Europe is wondering what the hell is going on with some of this wokeism
Mm.
in America. But all of Eastern Europe would be America's strongest ally in being strong against and being supportive against uh, communist dictatorial regimes like Russia. Like you're going to find your strongest support here in Eastern Europe. So again, America can choose to have no say in it, no part in it, or maybe this is just something where we are in the world and the northern hemisphere that America and Europe are pretty interlinked. They always have been, and maybe they'll continue to be. I certainly would like to have the U.S.'s support over here. But then people play it. People get angry at it. The NATO. I forget one of the NATO founding generals. It's like back in the 50s, right? He said NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in.
Hmm.
And
That's good.
yeah, I mean, I understand that as well. So I understand that there's backlash to that view. But as I already went through in my diatribe there, it's not like we don't have agency here to demand and to want our own security arrangement. And you see where everybody was literally running to, not crawling, not walking, but running to after the breakup of the Soviet Union was to try to get into NATO. And the
Yeah.
vice grad countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary. I think those three at the beginning. Maybe not Czech Republic at the time. Maybe not Slovakia at the time. Anyway, some of those countries had already gotten in the 90s into NATO. So
Yeah.
it's not hard to see where they wanted to be.
What do you think of this Transnistria narrative?
It's a crazy part of the world that's influenced by Russia. It's not a real country, part of Moldova that's basically occupied by Russia.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you
what do you
see it
mean
as
by
like
what do
a
you mean by
well,
narrative? Did it come?
yeah. Well, okay, that's fair. No, just that Moldova is the next
Yeah,
invasion target, and
yeah,
that the kind of like influence that Russian has in Transnistria, they would use a similar pretext that they did in the Donbass, which is like, hey, this is the
yeah,
people here want us. This is ethnically Russian.
yeah.
We're going in to protect our own.
It's the same thing they would try to do in the Baltics in the 30s. It's the same thing the Germans did in the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. This is the same tactics that they always use. So it's not a surprise, and I hope that they don't do it, and I hope that we can defend it. But yeah, Moldova is the one where it's like you got Transnistria, this sort of illegal, goofy Russian military state that's part of it. Um, Definitely, plenty of Moldovans don't want Russia to come in, but it's right there, right at the border of Ukraine. And if there's any place that's in danger, it would be them. We would be in danger as well. The Baltics have better land, better sea access. We have ports. We have everything that they want. That's why they occupied us in the Soviet Union. But thank God that we're in NATO. That I think that we are okay right now. But look, it's not like this is safe times. It's not like we're feeling. You think about it. It's not like I think about it every minute, every day, but you think about it most days that, like, look, there's this horrible war going on right, you know, less than 1,000 kilometers from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy, man. It's heavy. Thinking about our friends in Ukraine for sure today. So
Shall we pivot?
we can pivot. We can pivot. Um,
It's hard to go anywhere from there.
yeah. Do you want to talk about this chart that we've had up?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Um, so I got this total money supply chart. The video has not been released as of the moment of this recording when I talk about this, but I have released 11 videos thus far on the money supply, covering every component of the United States money supply, reconstructing M1, reconstructing M3. I'm sure you've been watching those.
Hmm. No, I haven't seen every single one of them. Because it's
That was even the better. That's the best response I could have hoped for. Not even a sarcastic one. Not even just genuine reading something else online.
reading something else online. I mean, it's hard. I have so much to follow on Twitter,
I know, man.
and I have
I
to
know.
read all of Elon's tweets.
Yes.
So,
Anything interesting there, by the way, as of late?
no. Um, I think the latest thing is they rolled out a Cybertruck somewhere in Austin to show it off.
A big company took an order of those, didn't they?
Did they? I don't know. They're
Which
really
is
cool
like
looking.
really, it's like 5 years late. again, we don't have to get into Elon. It's just he doesn't. He's not.
We'll give him the week off.
Yeah, no, it's. I don't want to be too redundant on the video, but I'm happy to do so, of course. Uh, it is
Well,
a lot.
explain
It is a
state
lot.
versus bank money.
Well, it's hard to. So this gets back into some Bitcoin stuff, some monetary macro stuff. It's hard to focus on a lot of the monetary statistics for the average person. I totally admit it, but I do think it's interesting. Weinstein actually did a whole, not a whole spiel, but it was part of a rant that he did about how there's like no information and nobody knows anything and physicists don't know enough these days. And he's like, why don't we have the M1 monetary aggregate wasn't continue to be published, which is true. Um, I had to reconstruct an M1 monetary aggregate because the Fed has stopped publishing that from May of 2020. And the M3 monetary aggregate, they have stopped publishing from February 2006, long time now. I think it's important and interesting to see the total liquidity in the economy, total money in the economy. And I think that if you're talking about a future potential base money like Bitcoin, digital, new protocol, how can it work? It's good to understand like what the current system looks like. And of course, there's a lot more detail and levels we can go into. But yeah, state versus bank money. Basically, this is the total money supply of the United States. Kind of proud of it, I guess, because yeah, this lightest green shaded area, M3 non M2 here, which I'm highlighting, that hasn't been published since 2006. So you have to go in and find the data, reconstruct it, and some of the data isn't there at all, such as Eurodollars. So that's a whole other thing we can talk about. Yeah. I have an estimate, but it's definitely understated. And then this part, M1, non M0, which is collapsing there, the darkest green. That's what Weinstein was talking about. The Fed basically stopped. They have an M1 supply, but it's basically the same thing as M2. It's so stupid. They basically just combined M1 and M2, and they didn't make a backwards compatible curve. So anyway, I had to do that.
Let's pause and just calibrate, right? So M1, M2, M3.
Yeah.
We find them.
Yeah, I will. Let's take off all the. Let's take off actually all of this.
So we're also going to talk about repos because I need to understand that.
Sure.
I always see the posts about them. Sure. I'm like, oh gosh, repos.
Yeah. We can do
it. It's like how we always promise that we learn about contango and backwardation.
Oh man, yeah, that's a tough one. This is what we call the public-facing money supply: M0, M1, M2, M3. There is an M4 in some countries as cases, but this is the public-facing money supply. The total, as you see, is in red. So the vast majority is public-facing money. And the green shaded areas are what you call bank money, not state money, not money that's printed by the Federal Reserve or any nation's central bank. So this is literally money that's cash balances that are created by a bank. Now, they have reserves, of course, but those reserves aren't on this chart. But M0 is actually the bottom level, and M0 is state money, but it's part of M1. So it's kind of confusing. But here, hopefully you can see it quite easy. So let's even zoom into the global financial crisis. You can see it a little bit better here. We started total money supply 17 trillion on the eve of the financial crisis, during the financial crisis. M0 was only 790 billion. M1, non-M2, was 1.1 trillion. Okay, so let's even take out M2. Let's take out M3. Let's take out even M1. Just look at M0 here, okay? So it's not that much. What is M0? It's basically all the physical cash and coin that's outside of bank vaults.
That you refer to as base money a lot of times.
It's part of base money. It's not all. Okay. But this is another confusing thing about the money supply. It's why I like trying to point this stuff out is the Bank of England, the Reserve Bank of South Africa, they refer to M0 as base money. That's just how they define it. M0 is base money. But that's not how most central banks define it. And it's also not what makes sense if you need to add these things up. M0, properly defined, is just the physical cash and coin that is outside of bank vaults circulating the economy, under mattresses, in wallets, in cash registers, in grocery store tills, floating around, $100 bills even floating around Europe, in casinos and probably in other more nefarious places. Mm-hmm. M0. That's M0. So that grows a lot too. Like you can't even necessarily see it on this curve because the scale is trillions, but 790 billion financial crisis today, M0 is 2.2 trillion. So it grows at a fair clip, 6-7% per year compounded. I don't want to talk too much about growth rates because that's like a whole different topic anyway. So yeah, let's just keep it with the definitions. Then M1 non M0. So this is cumulative stuff. So M1 does include M0 if you just say total M1. But if you want to take M0 out, what is the non M0 portion? It is demand deposits, checking accounts, the most liquid form of a bank account, we would say. So that's M1. And you see a huge growth here with stimulus checks where pre-COVID, demand deposits basically 3.3 trillion. After COVID, 7.3 trillion. So this is stimulus checks. This is government bailouts of, this could be checking accounts of a company too. So, it's a massive $4 trillion. $4 trillion basically.
I didn't realize it's that much, and it hasn't it looks to still be going up.
Yeah, it is. Now this one is also slightly reconstructed. Unfortunately, the Fed. If you looked at a M1 chart, and a lot of people have been confused by this. If you looked on the Federal Reserve site, an M1 chart by the Federal Reserve, like it's somewhere here, May 2020. It's it's 4.7 plus M0. Again, I'm stacking these. These are not cumulative. So it's somewhere like 7 trillion total M0 and demand deposits. And then it just shoots up to 17 trillion. It's so stupid. And people are like, oh, they printed all this money. But all they were doing was combining basically the regulation D. It's like savings accounts. They put savings accounts into it, which is a huge portion of liquidity. And they did that because savings accounts used to have a limitation on how many transactions could occur per month. That's like kind of the regulation side of a savings account. Like it's less liquid. But that's gone away now. So basically a savings account is kind of the same thing from a regulatory standpoint. But that's so stupid for them to do that. I mean, still, you could offer a toaster to people who has a savings account. Banks used to do that, by the way. If you take a loan, get a free toaster. All banks could do all sorts of things, treating their customers differently who has a savings account and who has a checking account. And of course, they can be the same person, but it's so dumb to not report that. And also, all sorts of things changed with these stimulus checks. Like, there's no reserve ratios anymore. Like, money is just sloshing around like crazy. So, I don't want to get into it too much, but I had to reconstruct M1 here to get it going. And you can find most of the data. It's actually slightly overstated, probably, but not much relative to the whole thing. So that's M1. And then M2 is less liquid or kind of really less regulated retail type deposits. So put M2 on. This is just the non-M. Of course, again, it's cumulative. You could put M1 in there to get the total M2. But if you look at the non-M1 M2, as you see here, look at non-M1 M2. That's 5.9 trillion. Certainly, this is the biggest one we've seen so far, right? 5.9 trillion, 6 trillion, global financial crisis. Now, 11.8 trillion. So also that's grown 5-6 trillion.
Well, when you say retail deposits, what does that mean?
Yeah. So savings accounts, retail money market funds, which that's when you're cashing out of stock and you say you're in cash. This is like broker dealer type money. That's what that is. So for the retail sector, and as the U.S. defines it, small time deposits under $100,000. That really means retail. And again, certain countries do this a little bit differently. It's not always the time deposit. Some people put time deposits in M3. It's always different classifications, but this is how the U.S. does it. So the easy way to think about it is like basically retail type, other retail monetary instruments are M2. And then M3 now to the top of the stack is institutional monetary instruments that are not included in the lower levels. So that's going to be institutional money market funds, large time deposits, anything that's over 100K in balance, and it's also going to be repos. So that's also an M3.
Is this where you explain what a repo is?
I can if you want. You want to do it?
It's not just me. The audience wants to know.
All right. Well, I got a video on it. I got many videos actually on it. Definitely please check out that as well if you this is the first time you're hearing this. but redundancy is not something I'm not afraid of for sure, and not something we should we should do on this show. So quickly, um, a repo is basically a security, a government security. It's a liquid security that trades like cash. That's the easiest way to think about it. It's a security that trades around between banks and non-banks, money market funds, hedge funds, subsidiaries of banks, which are actually different than a bank. Like they have all these sort of non-bank subsidiaries of banks, but to get around regulations. This is kind of how the system has grown in the U.S. Broker dealers, all of these institutions that are non-banks, they primarily they're kind of cash. Their currency of choice is repos because you earn interest on it if you're the reverse repo party. It says repo, so go right into it, right into the weeds. Um, think of it like a government bond that pays a government bond that trades like cash.
Mm.
So it doesn't actually mean that you're floating the security through a bank account. Like that's not what is happening. What is happening is you're a money market fund. You have excess liquidity, right, in your coffers, and of course you have relationships and accounts, and you can create. This is shadow banking, by the way. This is an IMF term. Your money market funds are not banks. So you have money market funds. Also, another way to that's a stable coin. It's a stable coin, right? So
Mm.
tokens that try to get to the value of $1. That's the same thing with a money market fund. One share, the NAV is always around $1. What's
Mm.
on the other side of that? It's liquid securities. They're buying and selling securities, and the reason they do that is because they can collect a spread, a profit, and you, dear user of that money market fund or dear user of the stable coin, you get liquidity. You can send that around like cash. So that's a money market fund.
Mm.
Money market funds are typically the opposite side of a repo. They're the reverse repo party. So they have all this liquidity people have given them. And when someone on the other side, typically like a hedge fund, subsidiary of a bank, someone wants to take some risk, they have securities. They have securities they want to do something with. They want to lever up. They will repo. What they do, they call it. They're going to repo a security. So the repo side is like a hedge fund, for example. Hedge fund goes to the money market fund and says, "Hey, I got a security. Let's repo." The hedge fund is going to sell the security to the money market fund overnight. Typically, it's very quick. Money market fund is going to give the liquidity in their cash. They're going to literally like an account transfer, right? They're going to give them liquidity to the hedge fund. They're going to have cash, basically it's a repo. It's called a repo on their account, but it's like a cash like instrument. And then from there, the hedge fund can do other stuff. They could
Mm.
short, they could long, they could lever, they could do other stuff with banks or with other partners. It's liquidity for them. But basically, what's happening is they're trading the security like cash, and then the hedge fund promises to pay the money market fund back tomorrow at a slightly higher price. And that's the
Mm.
interest rate. That's the repo rate. So the slightly higher price to pay them back for the loan that they just took, that's daily interest. You can calculate an annual yield from that, so on and so forth. And that's the repo market.
Mm.
So people repo all the time. Typically, it's money market funds that are reverse repoing. That's what you call it. Broker dealers in there, of course, as well as a separate party. They do it. They repo. All of this cash is sloshing back and forth, and the idea is that people can generate a little bit more process or a little more profit in the process. But I think the simple way to think of it is this is basically a government security that someone holds that's trading around like cash. There's extra leverage on top of it, like extra interest on top of it, and it's just a vast. The vast majority of this product is in the shadow banking sector. It's not in the commercial banking sector, and that's true actually. If you look at my repo video, you'll see that repos from banks are very small compared to repos of non-banks,
Mm.
hedge funds, and so on and so forth. So that's the repo. It's the repo market.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So that's an M3, and that's been an M3 for years and years. That's what they call it. Again, everything here, you're kind of the liability side. Deposits, a checking deposit for the bank, right? That's an asset for you, but it's a liability for the bank. They owe you. They owe you.
Yeah.
What do they owe you? Well, if you want to take out cash, they give you cash, or if you want to trade your balance with a balance in another bank, they'll make that trade, and that trade can happen at the Federal Reserve level or a different level. Typically, the Federal Reserve level is like the final level, with the bank reserve portion, which we'll talk about in a second. Um, but yeah, that's how liquidity sort of sloshes around. That's like the guts of the system a little bit, and I think it's good to show all this. The Fed stopped publishing this. Like you can back in. They in 2012 they restarted a repo thing, so that's how I constructed the repo number. They still publish large time deposits quarterly, and then you have to back into institutional money funds. It's so stupid. Like they publish total money funds quarterly, and then they publish retail money funds monthly. So you can still back into institutional. So I've done all that. You can work it out and reconstruct an M3. Um, the only thing that they don't do though at all is euro dollars, and euro dollars are also part of M3. And that is the X factor here, probably. That's going to be a lot. That's going to make this money supply, if I zoom out, a lot higher than it probably even is. And a euro dollar started after World War II, started with the Marshall Plan. It started with Europeans starting to demand dollars because all this like American liquidity is coming in to rebuild Europe. And, Americans are just becoming the dominant sort of currency and force in the world. And so it's primarily started in London, but now it's everywhere. And it doesn't have anything to do with the euro currency. It has to do with, it's just the name stuck euro dollar. But if you hold dollars in Latin America, you have euro dollars. If you hold dollars in Japan, you have euro dollars. It's basically a dollar denominated account outside in a bank outside of the jurisdiction of the Federal Reserve. That's a euro dollar, and it should be an M3. So
Does it include cash circulating outside of the U.S.?
no, that's an M0. That's an
That's
M0.
an M0.
That
Okay.
M0 is just all physical cash. Yeah. So we do have M0 covered. We see how big that is here, 2.2 trillion. But this is it. This is bank money. So the one caveat with this money supply is I don't have euro dollars. Like I have a very, very vastly I don't even know if it's a trillion. It was something like 450 billion here when they stopped publishing. Again, I have a video dedicated to this on my YouTube channel, but it's inside of M3, and I just simply extrapolated what they had based on the growth of the rest of M3, which is not necessarily a bad thing to do. But if you look at, this is what I talked about in that video, like if you look at the Paradise Papers, the Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, these were trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of liquidity that was leaked, that was existed in Caribbean banks, many other. But Caribbean is a big source of euro dollars, but of course, not all of that is in bank accounts, but there is a lot of it. There's a lot of it for sure.
But was it unknown that money was there? I thought it was just unknown who held it.
It's not unknown that it's there. And that's
like the fact that it was there was known. It was just like, oh,
Yeah.
we didn't know that this was like, this dictator's bank account.
Correct. That's a good question, actually. And I say this as well in the Eurodollar video, is I think what you have to do, and no one is doing this, like not even the BIS is unfortunately giving like a clear, transparent Eurodollar supply. I did an example of Argentina. Argentina, like we could go on there. I could show you the money supply. They show local currency, pesos, all the way up to M3, and then they even break out foreign currency all the way up to M3. Like that's how they do it. And so what you have to do is take that foreign currency section, which I think was like $15 billion for them on the official exchange rate, which means the real dollar amount because they show you in pesos. So $15 billion. And of course, they say foreign currency. They don't say dollars, but obviously they're not holding Russian rubles in Argentina. So it's nearly probably all of that is a euro dollar. So $15 billion exists in Argentina alone. You have to basically go to every central bank's balance sheet and reconstruct it. So that'd be like a life project. I'm not sure how I've already done it with base money. We'll see how long until we get to the euro dollar reconstruction, but it's a long game.
Do other like large currencies have a concept of they wouldn't call it this, right? But
no, they do. There's euro sterling. There's euro sterling.
Oh, they call it that?
Yep, that's a real thing. Euro sterling.
Do they call it the euro yuan?
Don't know, but probably
I doubt
not,
they would accept that name.
Probably not. Overseas yuan, something like that. Yeah, but they do have that concept. China is next to the U.S., China is the second worst publisher of money, so it's going to take a while to get there.
I thought a lot of the foreign yuan is in the form of tether. Isn't that where it all goes?
Maybe.
I mean, that was like the known secret, right? Was
Yeah.
Yuan flows into Hong Kong, turns into Tether, turns into Bitcoin or
Well,
whatever.
ironically, and this is in there, by the way. I didn't say that, but let's take them all off. This is M3, non everything else. I did put stable coins. So
Oh, nice.
Tether is a Eurodollar actually. It's precisely fits perfectly in the definition of a Eurodollar. So Euro Yuan turns into Eurodollars, and it's there. Of course, it's 150 billion. When you're talking about M3, non M2 is 10 trillion. It's a rounding error, right? But
Yeah.
I do have the stable coins in there. So I've
Hmm,
reconstructed the
nice.
whole M3. It's all there. I'm pretty actually proud of it. I think it'll be a good thing to track. We can see what will happen here, but M0 to M3, that's how it looks like. And then
Hmm.
we're running short on time. I want to get to your privacy stuff, but this is, with the exception of M0, this is bank money, right? It's how it works. How the fiduciary system. It's how it works. You create deposits. You have liabilities. You have assets in the form of loans and other things. Repos, reverse repos, assets, liabilities. Stuff trades around. But you can measure the liquidity if you just track one side, the liability side. And we have M0. It's a physical cash, and then the rest of the blue items here, Vault Cash, which is like nothing. Watch the chart not even move when I hit Vault Cash.
Hmm.
That's physical cash in banks.
Hmm.
Let's take it off right now just to see. Like, I mean, it was, you can't even get, yeah, 4 billion, a couple billion. If you go here, 89 billion out of 37 trillion in money.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's Vault Cash, and then the two other things is Fed repos. They have a huge portion on their balance sheet, 2 trillion. This is not traditionally based money, but it's just become base money basically. So this is basically the shadow banking system has liquidity now from the Fed repos, and then bank reserves. This is the whale account. This is what I put the little whale icon. This is the
Hmm.
thing that's just gone crazy. And actually, if you go back in the past, I showed in my video, Vault Cash was bigger than bank reserves back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, but now, so if you take everything off,
When you say back in the day, what are we
even like
talking?
60s, 70s, 80s.
Oh, not that long ago.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
let's take off uh, the green. First of all, you can see that pre-financial crisis, you see still the vast majority of base money here is physical cash, right? M0. But if you look, let's just look at it at the number in the tooltip. 1973 bank reserves 13 billion, vault cash 9 billion. Let's look. 1985 vault cash 22 billion, bank reserves 16 billion.
Hmm.
So it's actually more cash. Savings and loan crisis also happened here, so it could be that although savings and loans did have access to bank reserves, but anyway, not that big. So anyway, you add all those together, that is liquid money. And you got basically bank money in the green and state money, the monopoly money in the blue. And we don't have to go through the percentages and everything. It shows the difference. It's 21% right now, state money versus total money. So 80, a little less than 80%, 78% bank money. If you're going to talk about Bitcoin and the potential of Bitcoin as money, it's not with the green shaded area. Exchanges, that's a Kraken account. That's a Coinbase account. That's what you're counting
Hmm.
up the liabilities. If you want to just count up the Bitcoin, count up the Bitcoin. But that's analogous economically to the base money, to the state money, to the core of the system. So that's what I talk about with the base money stuff. So yeah, that's
Hmm.
the crash course. Uh,
Nice.
I'm sure you're keen to watch all of the 11 videos that I've published thus far. So just go ahead and do that this weekend. No problem.
Uh-huh. Well, I got a 3-year-old's birthday party, so I don't know how much time I can
I mean,
dedicate to videos.
educational content
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah, listen, do you guys want to see the magician or they're both kind of magic though, right?
They are.
So,
That's a very good way to put it, my friend.
yeah.
Do you want to do a
No,
crash
this is
course on privacy now as we
Yeah, I'll do a
pivot out?
little download. I so it's in the last year I haven't had nearly as much time as I wanted to write about privacy stuff, which is something I genuinely enjoy, and used to be able to do more often. And gratefully, it's because I get to do more privacy stuff. But one of the things I was noticing in just my personal life and in making recommendations to clients, friends, etc., is your cell phone number is a massive vulnerability, regardless of where you are in the world. And what we see in actually a lot of the world is that there is increasing scrutiny on even acquiring a cell phone number. So in the US, you can still go with cash into a bodega and buy a SIM kit and get a SIM card without really attributing much personal information at all.
Mm.
Especially if you continue, like you can top up these SIM cards with Bitcoin or, use a Visa gift card or whatever. But if you're in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right, you have to show your passport or government ID, and you can get one SIM card, and that number is inextricably bound to you. And that's actually the trend we see in most of the world is that uh, governments and commercial entities really want to associate a true identity to a phone number because it's used in so many economic things. It's used for candidly,
Yep.
and this is not crazy talk. It's used for targeting of individuals, right? Your number becomes your identity, and it's actually more you than your social security number, to use a U.S. example,
Yeah.
because you use your phone number on everything, and you use your social security number, to open a bank account and a few other things. So, if I were an OSINTer, an investigator, and I was looking to have a starting point on someone, I'd actually rather have their phone number than even their name or their social security number or their home address. Because once you have the phone number, you can get to everything else typically.
Yeah.
And so I, like most people, had also had the same phone number since the year 2000. So when I embarked on this, it was a year ago. So that was a 22-year-old phone number, um, long associated with me. And I find that's fairly common because once cell phones entered the market, you didn't change your phone number when you moved. Your phone number used to be associated with or it is associated with an area code. Remember, like when we were kids, your phone number told you where someone lived. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, this is, I used to live in Arizona back 20 years ago when I got a phone number. And so that's all that number says about anyone. And so I had a phone number for a really long time. It was linked to a lot of things. And there was some inertia on my part to try to extract myself from that because of all the accounts and all the relationships and the people that, I had it in my mind that, someone from 5 years ago was going to text me and we were going to, have a long lost friendship rekindled. And I couldn't get rid of that number for that reason or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was not happening, but these are the excuses I was making. So, but I had been advising clients like, hey, sometimes you really need to get away from your phone number if you're going to reset in a privacy way. For some people, that's required. So what I did is a couple things. So I did not get rid of my phone number, and I would not advise getting rid of your long held cell phone number ever, because what happens, it goes back into the pool of available numbers and it gets reassigned to someone else. It might not get reassigned right away. It might never get reassigned. That's possible depending on the demand in your area code. But mathematically, any given area code in the US could result in 8 million phone numbers. So if you take a city like Los Angeles or Manhattan or New York, right, they can easily draw down on an entire area code. And that's why large metropolitan areas typically have 2, 3, 4, 5 sometimes area codes. In New York, you've got, two for Manhattan. You've got the outer boroughs all have one or two area codes. And so you don't want your number to just pop out there and be available to someone else, nor would you want someone nefariously to see that number has now become available and request it, because you can request a number if you know it's available.
Mm.
So uh, what I did is I took my long held number and I parked it over in a VoIP service. And I can still receive messages and calls on that. And I can still use that number. I still own that number. And I found a VoIP service that none of them, I was not blown away by the security at any of them, but I found one that is pretty good. And I attempted to go through an access change with each of the VoIP services I tested out to see how easy it is to call them up and say, I forgot my password.
Mm-hmm.
Can you let me back into my account?
Mm-hmm.
And one or two of them were incredibly easy to get into. Like, just trust me, I'm locked out. Can you help me with my password? Was
Wow.
basically what their security was. With the one I found, and please contact me if anyone wants it. I'd rather not
Sure.
throw the name out
Yep.
here, but
Yep.
they allow me to exercise a reasonable amount of control. And so to authenticate the account and then to have further controls around porting out of numbers, because that's what I really want to make sure can't happen. Someone can't port that number out. I don't care about the number quite as much anymore because it's been a year since I've done this, so I've really drawn down any usage of it. But there are times when I'll get a message or I forgot about an account and I'll need to leverage that number to get back in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of divorce side. The marriage side is I needed to get a new number, and what I decided to do was get 2 new cell phone numbers. And in the iPhone world, any model after the XR is dual SIM enabled. And I don't know, in Europe, are a lot of phones dual SIM enabled?
I think most new phones, whether it's Apple, Android, you're going to be able to have dual SIM.
Yeah, and so you'll see like it's either a hard SIM and an eSIM or
Right.
dual eSIM. The newer iPhones are even dual eSIM if you want. So to fast forward, right, where I ended up was I have a public number that's a cell phone number that is what I give out if I meet someone at a conference, or it's really the number that people contact me on. I have a private number that is also a cell phone number that I give out to no one, and I use that in the cases where I have to have a cell phone number and an entity is forcing me to use a cell phone number. And again, in the US, there are databases of record that you can check to see if a number is a VoIP number, a landline, or a cell phone number. And so to pick on Meta, right? Meta has access to that database. So when you sign up for a Facebook account, they can tell whether you're trying to give them a burner VoIP number or whether you're trying to give them a cell phone number.
Mm.
I don't have, that's not my use case, but there are times when I really need a cell phone number. And I don't want that number to also be discoverable as mine. So I have a public number, I have a private number, and I have my VoIP number. That entire process took about 2 or 3 days to go through, and not entire days, but over the course of 2 or 3 days, I kind of did that reset. And there was some friction for the first 2 or 3 weeks of just letting people know and transitioning. And that was it. It was not bad. And now I have this really strong posture, as good as I think I can do without like going off the grid, right? And someone's going to listen and be like, well, if you kept one phone in a Faraday bag and another phone, is in your pattern of life, and you have a third travel phone, right, you could do better. And they're absolutely right. But to just kind of live in the world without accruing challenges to you and your family, this is a good setup. The thing that I really like is layering in an additional data privacy layer, and I do that through an APN. And so an APN allows you to encrypt data coming off of the data channel of that device without, there's no application, there's no VPN on off. It is always on, always encrypted, runs through a private core and out into the carrier's core and then into the internet. And it's kind of one layer of security that I don't have to think about once I've placed on there. And so the net result is encrypted data, 2 phone numbers for different purposes, maintain my VoIP, my old number as a VoIP number. A couple of days, total cost around $1,200 a year if you do all of that, which is not nothing, but it's also not like, people are probably paying $1,200 a year for a lot of things when they think about it. And to me, the cell phone number is such a target that it's well worth. And you could probably go to about $1,600 a year, and you could probably get it done for closer to $600, depending on what options you select. But this is how I came out on it. And I'm going to post this article for anyone who's interested in a little more detail on it. But my message to people is your cell phone number is you. Treat it with care. Don't give it to every grocery store that you want to get a discount at.
Yeah.
And make sure that it is not easily assigned to someone else, because as soon as you lose control over that, you lose control over a large swath of your life.
Yeah. 2 questions. Firstly, you said contact me if you want some more info. Do you want me to put that in the description? How are people contacting you these days? Talking about contacting a private
I
person.
didn't think you would ask a follow-up question and that would just go into the ether. Yes, I will. I actually have an email address that I use. As you know, I'm a big fan of Anonaddy, which
Yeah.
is a forwarding service. You can pay for it with Bitcoin. So I will share my Anonaddy, and I actually once in a while do get an inquiry or two. Not very many, but
Mm.
I'm always very welcome, or those are very welcome, and I'm happy to respond to them.
Nice. Nice. Okay. And then second question, if you're using this number, like you said, for grocery store discounts or whatever, all the time anyway, this new number, like that becomes a pretty important number anyway. So,
No, I use my old VoIP number for that kind of thing now because it's that
okay.
number's already burned.
Right. Oh, okay. But
Yeah.
no, I'm just wondering, like, you still have to worry about the security of that at some point too, because it's still a lot of things. Depending on you gotta pick and choose what each number is used for, I guess. And I guess
Yes.
there's a framework for that you have about what's important, what's not, because something could maybe not seem important, but all of a sudden you're still using it with your old VoIP number. You're still using.
So you're exactly right. And I left out one component of this, and it's important to me to show that this stuff can all be do-it-yourself,
Hmm.
non-technical, not wildly expensive, without outside help other than YouTube and the internet. Halo has the ability to assign Halo, where I work, right, has the ability to assign like a multitude of anonymous VoIP numbers. And so I leverage some of those because I get them through work. But what I was trying to show is you don't need that.
Yeah.
You can always get it, right? Ping me, but you don't need to do that. You can do it yourself. And having a VoIP number is kind of your like throwaway, give it to the valet to get your car back. That's useful. Having your phone number that is public for people but is not used for commercial services, and then having your private number, that's a really good baseline. Can you kind of escalate from there? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. The number that you would need for sort of, I don't know, like main types of accounts, financial accounts or something like that. Which type of number is that again that you would use for like financial type accounts? You don't want
Yeah.
to say.
No, I don't mind, right? So the and there's probably more than one right way to answer this, but
Yeah.
for those accounts, I would use the private number
Okay.
because I'm not
Okay.
giving that number out anywhere. Now
Right.
that creates a vulnerability because that number is associated with me somewhere.
And it's still out
But
there.
if
Yeah. If you use
it's
that for
still
all
out there,
financial accounts, that's still an important number.
it's absolutely an important number, which is why for me it's a cellular number, which I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
tightly
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
And I work with an MVNO, like a network operator that affords a great deal of control over how your number is managed. So that's nice. And there's a couple of those MVNOs in the U.S. and I know some exist in Europe too. But there is no perfect way, right? Because you're going to associate information over time. But what I want is if someone was to try to buy my information from a data broker, I want them to find my VoIP number and my public number. My private number could be revealed at some point in a data breach, but it's not being collected by data brokers at this time.
Gotcha. Interesting, man.
Yeah, it was not nearly as bad as I thought. I
Yeah.
put it off for probably 2 years, and I was carrying around this like kind of shame that I hadn't done more. And then I found it's really not bad, and anyone can do it.
Well, and even if people really want to level up, I guess I should say, and go with Halo, obviously that's an option too. So
Sure.
we'll make
Yeah.
sure we have all that contact info in the description and so on and so forth. So interesting, man. I'm glad that you.
Yeah.
I remember when you switched over, and
Oh, of course.
probably a
Yeah.
step that I need to take as well at some point.
Well, now you have a brother in arms, and I can help you anytime. But anyone out there, like I really thought, oh my God, this is going to be so painful. And it was not.
Nice,
It truly wasn't.
nice, nice. Yeah, steps you got to take, man, to protect yourself. Definitely, definitely important. The threat levels keep expanding. Deep fakes, it's just crazy. Who
Yeah.
knows how things are going to turn out? But
We'll have to do some kind of cryptographic proof that it's you and me here because,
yeah, I
you
think
know,
that's where it's going. I don't think
I agree.
people understand that yet, but there's, at least from our knowledge of the way that Bitcoin works, is just that's the only option to get out of this sort of cesspool of just, I don't know, downward spiral of deep fakes and just scamming and spamming and taking people's information and just being in danger all the time. It's got to come into a play at some point. But then you get into the question of identity as well on top of that. So that's a perennial topic.
Yeah. That's a whole show right there. But
Yep.
I mean, we're
Yep.
seeing some of it like cryptographic validation with Nostr, right? Like,
Yeah.
that exists there.
Yeah. Good, man. Well, I know you got to get back to the grind there.
I
It's not
do.
not happy hour for you like it is for me. So have a good Friday.
Likewise. It's
And
5 o'clock somewhere. It's actually 5 o'clock where you
it's
are.
5 o'clock
So
exactly where I am. So I'm happy
yeah.
for that. Very happy.
Nice.
And
Always a pleasure.
yeah, never a chore, my friend.
Yeah. Likewise.
Great.